Okay, welcome back. This is going to be something new again, trying to give you guys some more content. And I'm about to record the walkthrough of the day two portion of the draft guide. I'm sorry, the draft board that I put out. It's available on chiefsdigest.com. It'll be in the links and everything. It's a PDF that you can download and print and have there with you for draft day. And I'm going to go through all the prospects I have lined up on day two in rounds 2 and 3. And I'm going to do this for the podcast that we're about to record live here as I do this. Just wanted to give you guys an inside look at how it goes and really kill two birds with one stone so you could see it as well. If you really like what this becomes, I could do this more often. I'm still planning on doing lives later in the week, post selections, maybe during the selections if they trade up. As well as doing the podcast with the other guys. So this is just kind of a bonus video that I wanted to make sure I got out for you as we go through the day two selections or the guys that I have on the board for the day two selections. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up the board and let you guys have a look at it. And we'll go through as I record the podcast. So let me just share this with you, and it should work out pretty well, I think. We'll go over here, and this is just a look at how I have laid out. So with that said, let's start the podcast. So welcome back to Locked On Chiefs. And this is really what I've been getting into more and more recently. You can get my draft board over at chiefsdigest.com. It's up there in a post, and I'll have links in both the show notes on YouTube and on the podcast. I'm doing these kind of simultaneously today, and we're going to take a look at the draft board for the day two selections. And this is really what it comes down to. We're going to go a little bit quicker than we did yesterday because there are more guys to cover, and honestly, there's more movement. Grades are a little bit looser on day two. It gives teams more room to maneuver in terms of how they grade a player that maybe other teams don't. So we're going to start real quickly with the quarterbacks. And I was pretty selective on day one with just 3, but in round 2, I have another 2. Daniel Jones, who's rumored to be going in round 1, but I think I'll believe it when I see it. Definitely a guy that I think can bring some things to the table, but I'm just not sure if teams are going to be sold on him. So I'm leaving him here. Mid to top, early to mid round 2, and it's going to be a guy that I think is going to fill a role for somebody. I don't know that he's going to sit, but I think this is value here. And as we move lower down into round 3, I think definitely Will Grier's a guy that some teams are going to have their eye on as a developmental backup type guy, a guy that can do things that they like, not necessarily the best well-rounded game, but somebody that accomplishes things that they look for. So that's going to be very important. We're going to look at him there at the bottom of the second, and then moving into the third of the 2 guys that I have. And anything beyond the third round to me is something that you can take a chance on based on a single trait that you like or a series of traits that you like. Doesn't have to be well-rounded. And there are things that I like about these 2 guys, and Jarrett Stidham out of Auburn and Brett Rippon out of Boise State. I like the Smurf turf, but he's definitely a guy. Those 2 that I think can fill in some spaces and give you some options at quarterback. The offense is, as it evolves, becomes more and more about being able to diagnose, being able to deliver the ball. And I think those guys still have some upside there that maybe they haven't reached, and some teams will pull it out of them. Moving over to the offensive line, you can see here, Chris Lindstrom out of Boston College is a guy that's an uber athlete. I think he's 3rd on the athletic matrix. You guys will have to double check me when you download it. But moves very well, can play multiple positions, can give you everything that you want in a zone run attack, can play with some power as well. And I think the guy that at tackle is probably the dark horse. I don't know. I think he's been undervalued by a lot of talking heads, but I think teams are going to like him a lot more. And Caleb McGarry out of the University of Washington, kind of a late riser in terms of didn't really have him as very vaunted in the college season, but postseason, workout-wise, you started to hear teams looking at him. And whether the media types like him or not, I think teams will. So I expect him to go on day 2 ahead of Dalton Reiser, in my opinion, because I think Reiser really is a guard. I don't think he gives you enough at tackle in terms of his mobility in order to play there at the NFL level. I think he's going to be a really nasty guard, though, and I like where he is. I think he's a day 2 guy, round 2, maybe in the last third. Eric McCoy, same thing. Center, nasty, plays with an edge, can do a lot of things. Late second round guy that can help you along your offensive line and be that leader. A lot of centers in the first couple of rounds, and that includes Elgin Jenkins, who's going to be in the third round, I believe. That's where his value is. Not quite as athletic as what we saw out of Bradbury, but can do the job. And I think he's going to be very interesting about how he fits where and what the scheme's going to be. A couple of other guys in Drew Samia that I think is going to be a little bit less than easily to plug in. Like, you're going to have to like maneuver things a little bit. That's going to give him more staying power, more options there. And that's going to be good for him as well. I think he's a guy that can really help you as time goes along, but maybe not like the initial day one plug and play. Froholt from Arkansas is another guy, athletic, can do his job. I really look for that. Yannick Kajus got kind of lost in the pre-draft process, but going into the pre-draft, just built off of film, etc. I had him on the second day, and I'm sticking to him there. We'll come back. We'll talk about the other prospects here as we go along. Day 3 guys will be in the next video and podcast. Running backs, this is where they start to come off the board. In my book, Josh Jacobs is the clear leader. Everyone seems to have him at the top of the board, but I have him in the middle of the second as the number 1 running back. That's key to see. Miles Sanders the same way. I think he's got a lot of upside, as well as Darrell Henderson, the two that I have at the bottom of the second, that I think can go help somebody. I think that's going to be key for them in that they're not, again, plug and play. They have to help. I think committees are going to be good for them. I think eventually both of them can take over primary roles, but I think to start with, I think they should be in a committee. I really like Dexter Williams out of Notre Dame. He was in to visit the Chiefs in particular. I think he offers you playmaking ability in both aspects of running and receiving. I think he's got a lot of spring. I like the way that he plays. Travion Williams, I think, is going to sneak into day 2 as well. I see folks projecting him higher. I'm not sure that that's true, but this is kind of where I see him. He should be towards, the high 80s, 90s type selection, and I think he's a guy that can help. This is also the hugest portion for the tight ends, and I think they, in particular, are really going to be helped by the value elsewhere in this draft. And as they come along, that's what's going to go on. And I think these guys in particular, Hawkinson's a well-rounded, you can plug him and he can play both areas of the game, running the ball, passing, receiving. He could do it all. And I think he's a very early pick in the second round. That's where his value is for me. He'll probably go in the first, and that's fine. But I think tight end is a round 2 position. I think that can really be the spot that makes the most sense for him. So he comes off early. His teammate comes off nearly after him, but later down in the round because of his athletic upside. He's got a little bit of ball handling issues. I think Matt Waldman pointed that out pretty well in his RSP, and I think that's important to consider when you're talking about a guy that's going to be a primary pass catcher for you. Irv Smith, Jay Sternberger, and Foster Moreau. 3 guys that I think, depending on where you want to line them up, how you want to use them, they could go in any order really in the third round. I prefer Moreau, but I know a lot of people want to test the seam with Sternberger. Just not as athletic as I would like, but a guy that I think can help a team. Those are the tight ends for the second day that I think are really going to be active. And then this gluttony of wide receivers. The wide receivers are going to be a challenge because they have so much going on at that position on the second day. And I'm just going to go down them in order. Paris Campbell, Deebo Samuel, Hakeem Butler, DK Metcalf, Kelvin Harmon, all in the second round. And then as we start to get into the third, Boykin, Arcega-Whiteside, Terry McLaurin, Riley Ridley, N'Keal Harry, and Mecole Hardman. All guys that can contribute in an aspect that they do, but all guys that I don't feel are 100% well-rounded. Maybe outside of Paris Campbell, because I think he can do things that he wasn't asked to do in college, and that's important. That's going to be what sets him apart as well. And when you look at the board, it is just a target-rich environment for this particular position group. I do have DK Metcalf down here in the second round because I do feel like he's not a guy that can do it all, cannot do enough to warrant himself a spot there high in the top 32 picks. He's also got a serious issue or concern with injury. And I think that's got to play into it more so than maybe media types have led on, but teams will certainly be concerned about. And that's going to be something that is going to catch up with him. So that's where I see that guy in particular. Of this group, I like Paris Campbell a lot. I like the guys that can play multiple positions. I think the dark horse for me is going to be N'Keal Harry. I don't believe any of the first round hype for him. I think he's got some work to do, but I think he's got a lot of upside of being a well-rounded receiver. And Riley Ridley has been up and down. I thought he played well in college, but obviously his pre-draft process was not the greatest. So, it's going to remain to be seen what he's going to do. So that's a good place to stop. We'll come back after the break and we will talk about the defense. And for you on YouTube, I'm going to cut it off there just for a second while I pause and get ready for the second half of this podcast, because I know there's going to be questions. And I know you're going to be looking at this draft board going, well, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I'm not sure that I agree with that. But that's okay. It's perfectly fine to disagree, but this is where I see them. And I want to give you a lay of the land as to how I see it. So with that said, I'm going to jump back into the podcast and talk about the defense. And we'll go through that from there. Hit your questions when you're done and all that. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast at Locked On Chiefs, as well as over here on RGR. I'm not giving you a whole lot of camera time because I'm trying to run the screen as well. But we're going to jump back into the defense here. And I think you guys are going to be a little surprised. You've probably pre-scanned ahead of it since I'm showing the whole thing, which is maybe not like what I should be doing. But this is a new experiment, so we're going to go for it. So that said, why don't I restart the pod here and we will get going. So as we come back, we're going to go over the defensive prospects for day 2. And if you're listening to this a couple days in advance, make sure during the day of Friday, before the festivities get going on Friday, you come back and listen to this and keep the board handy. I think it's going to be a good resource for everybody. I tried to make it more accessible this year and hopefully be something that everybody can get some value out of. So let's dig into it, because I think there's a good group at the D-line. And one guy that, when we were doing the mock for Locked On NFL, we were looking at Jerry Tillery at 29 for the Chiefs. He got taken at 28 by the Chargers, so we immediately pulled him. Obviously couldn't take him there. But I do feel like he is very close to a first-round talent. I just think there's a couple of little things that may force him down the board. So I think the very top of the second is the right spot for him, as I do with Dexter Lawrence. And even though they're stacked here, one on top of each other, I see those guys very similarly, maybe 35-ish kind of spot. And Dexter Lawrence, I think he can play in both schemes, but I think he's much better suited to being a nose in a 3-4. So depending on what he can do after, I don't know if he's going to be a guy that can be a 3-down pass rusher for you and be out there on third down, especially for teams that have to rush a lot. So I prefer to put him here in the second, where I think his value is, and I do put Christian Wilkins up ahead of him, his teammate. So that's just the way I see it. It's not a slight against Lawrence. It's just how I feel about him. Additionally, Draymond Jones, I think he's been flying kind of under the radar, and I think that he's a good value picker here in the second. Jeffrey Simmons, yes, he's a stellar, probably top 10 value if he were healthy, but he's not. So I'm not going to spend a first-round pick on him just to rest him a year. I do see him as a second-round value. I think he's good there. There are some question marks, but it gives you time to develop him, to work those things out, and work on everything else. Tristan Hill is flying way under the radar. UCF defensive lineman that I think really has a lot of potential. I think a third-round pick for him is a safe area. You're not reaching at that point, and you're going to get something out of it. As well as Rennell Wren and Colin Saunders, who's really been a great story in getting to where he's at. I think he's going to be picked on day 2, and I think he deserves that. I'm really interested to see where he lands, because I think scheme is going to help him, and I think he's a guy that's on the way up. When we look at the edge rushers, you saw a couple of guys drop out of what I had going on in the first round, and that's Rashawn Gary. A lot of people like to tout him up as this elite edge rusher, and he's athletic, but he's not elite. He's not a Von Miller. He doesn't get anywhere near that type of area. He rushes with power. He can play inside. That's fine. I don't think that when it comes down to the nitty-gritty in the NFL that he's an edge rusher. I think on third down, passing downs, he's going to play inside. So I'm going to bump hm down for that. It's just a fit thing. And so I have him at the top of the second rather than in the first round. Montez Sweat, we're hearing a lot about him dropping because of his heart condition that they found post-combine. And that's fine. I think that's where he belongs. I was a little worried about it. Production-wise, I think he's fine. I think he's a little lanky. I think he's a little stiff. But I think he can get the job done, especially in the right scheme. If he can line up a little bit wider, if he can use those long limbs, I think he's in for it. But that heart condition scares teams, and it scares me a little bit for him. I hope that he continues to play without incident as he has thus far in his career. Lower down at the end of round 2, I like Chase Winovich because he's just such a steamroller, and I think he's more athletic than people give him credit for. I think, especially in an outside linebacker role, he could really flourish, but I think he can play the down as well. LJ Collier's a guy that's been coming on in terms of evaluations, and I think he plays power, and I think this is a guy the Chiefs might look at because he can play that power rusher down. He's a little more athletic than you might think just by watching his film, and I think he's got room to improve still. Like what I hear about his nasty streak, his intensity, I think that's great assets for him. Austin Bryant is the other guy that everyone forgets about when they're talking about Clemson fronts. And I think he's underrated. I think a 3rd-round pick for him gives you that cushion that you're not expending, a prime top 50 pick, but gives you a lot of upside. And I think he can produce. Got to get a little more intense. I think he's got a few things that he can work on, but I think he could be a good player in year 2 and 3. Both Max Crosby and Ben Banago out of TCU, I think, are athletic selections that can help you long-term. And I think they're guys that are worth this 3rd-round pick based on upside. And then I have Jalen Ferguson, who I am just torn on because of his performance. Really comes out to be a slower version, at least laterally, of Tom Bahali, but he played with power. He's been very successful, and I think football traits are going to override his lack of athleticism in certain areas, especially if he plays at his normal playing weight. Zach Allen, I think, is a working guy kind of deal, but I don't think he's an explosive guy that can take over games. So I'm a little lower on him. I think the bottom of the 3rd is the right spot for him. Getting into the linebackers, I think Mack Wilson falls just because I don't think he's an A1 intensity kind of guy. I think he'll be an okay player. But middle of the 2nd, I think, is a good spot for him. And I think it's kind of dry in the 2nd round for the linebackers. Then you get into the guys that are going to be more athletic and can play specific roles. I like Drew Tranquil all the way around. I think he's underrated, and I think he's a guy that can play 3 downs for you. Same with Voshan Joseph. I think he's a little light and he's a little out of control. He's got some coaching that he needs, but I think he can be a guy that contributes in year 2 and 3. Bobby Okereke, I think, is a real underrated prospect. I think he's somebody that can help a team in a way that we're not really looking for right now. It may be his intensity, it may be his leadership. He's got super long arms. He's more athletic than he looks, and I think he can make a difference. I'd like to see him at Sam in a 4-3 lineup, but we'll see where he ends up. And then the big question mark, Jelani Tavai out of Hawaii, a guy that hasn't been in the pre-draft process due to injury. I think he can play 3 downs. He's rushed off the edge. He's played in coverage. He plays zone pretty well. I think he's a nice off-ball backer that can probably play the middle, maybe the Sam, and every now and then give you some pass rush, whether it's from a stand-up linebacker spot, blitzing A and B gaps, or actually lining up on the edge in some relief. So he's a guy to watch for out of Hawaii. Then you get to the corners, and this list is long, starting with DeAndre Baker, Rock Ya-Sin, Julian Love, Sean Bunting, Trayvon Mullen, Lonnie Johnson, Justin Lane, David Long, Amani Aruarie, Jawan Williams, who a lot of people say are going to go higher, and Isaiah Johnson. I mean, there is a ton of names in there, right? And they're all different. David Long is the shiftiest corner in this draft. Lot of short area quickness, can really go into the nickel, I think, and play a significant role. Baker and Ya-Sin don't have long speed, but they're tough at the point of attack. They can play man nicely. You have the long corners like Lonnie Johnson, Isaiah Johnson, Jawan Williams that can play press real well. Might be a little disturbed when trying to play somebody that's real shifty. There's drawbacks to all of them. But there is plenty to choose from here in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. I think 9, maybe 10 of these guys go off the board in that area. I personally, for the Chiefs, tend to like Julian Love, maybe Trayvon Mullen, and then farther down, I would take a chance on Lonnie Johnson in the 2nd. I don't know if he'll be there. Hearing a lot of rumor that he may be going up, but Julian Love is a guy that I think is a sleeper for Kansas City. I don't know if Rock Ya-Sin and DeAndre Baker are going to be there when they get to make a selection. And then if you listen to the mock draft, Chris and I took Nasir Adderley for the Chiefs in the Locked On Network draft. And I don't think he'll be there, obviously, but I think there are a number of 2nd round safeties that could help a team, in particular the Chiefs. And they go from the free safety types like Darnell Savage and Juan Thorne, who can play deep, Gardner Johnson, who can play deep. All 3 of those guys can then come up and play some corner as well. Really, really diverse skill set that I think the Chiefs like, and you could pair with Tyrann Mathieu pretty well. That's definitely something to look for and something that I think that will really help them. And then you have the guys that are going to be the stronger type. You have Taylor Rapp that makes a lot of plays on the ball, isn't that athletic from his overall speed, but his instincts make up for that. And then you have just the hammer, John Abram, who I think has to be a strong safety. I don't want him in the back. I don't know that you want him playing a ton of man coverage unless it's just on tight ends. But he brings the hammer. He's an enforcer. He plays instinctively. I think he's a great player too. I think they all go in the top, 70 picks. I think they're all steadily in the second half. And then it drops into the third where you have Deontay Thompson, Amani Hooker, and Mike Edwards. Those are the three that I have slated there. Thompson's obviously dropped, and I think Hooker's underrated. So they're kind of meeting in the middle at the top of the third round where I think they will give a team some value. I think Hooker can play deep. I think Thompson can play deep, but you gotta work with them. Need some coaching up there. Mike Edwards, I think, is an underdog. I think he can do a number of things, and he did play for Matt House at Kentucky, so there's a Chiefs tie in there. So that's where it sits right now. That's the board. So, for those of you watching on YouTube, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out and listen to this. And for all of you guys that are listening out there on the Locked On Chiefs podcast, let us know what you think. Hit at Locked On Chiefs on Twitter. Hit Ryan Tracy NFL on Twitter. Let us know what you think. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to have more run up to this. We'll talk about day 3, guys, and then we're going to get into actual predictions with some of our friends and experts going into Thursday. So thank you all for your time. Thanks for listening to us today, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. And for those of you on YouTube, thank you for watching this. I know it's a little bit of a different thing. Let me know what you think of this, and we'll come back and do more of this. If you missed the first round, my draft board, I did the podcast for Monday. You can go back and listen to that. But Monday night's Q&A, I did all kinds of stuff about first round guys. So make sure you check that out as well. Appreciate the time. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.